So said 2 minutes. I think we'll make a restart. Eilidh, it's brilliant to have you here with us at Talmo. Anyone would think that we'd sort of deliberately designed this session by having your session on exploring the impact of gamification on engagement in a statistics classroom. Following on from that of Lewis, I think that links perfectly. So almost like we designed it, but brilliant to have you here. And over to you, Eilidh.
Great, thank you very much. And thank you to you all for organising the session and for you all for being here. Also, thank you to my colleagues, Dr. Craig Alexander and Professor Eleanor Jones, who this work is joint with. So I just wanted to shout out for those two. Okay, so before I go into sort of the issues that we were seeing and what we did to try and tackle those issues, which is the main bulk of the talk, I wanted just to give you a bit of context into the course that we were running, the type of students that we have on that course, and how the learning is generally structured. So you might guess from my accent, I'm based at the University of Glasgow within the School of Maths and Statistics. And the course that we were running was a level 1 statistics course. So for those of you who aren't aware, in Scotland, our degree programmes generally are over 4 years. So this course is typically taken in year 1, sometimes year 2 of a degree programme. This year, I think we're sitting at around 300 students, so it's quite a big class. Lectures are all together, so we'll have around about 300 students if they all come in the lecture theatre at once. And what we tried to do in 2020, 2021 was introduce some active learning into these courses. You will notice that those dates coincide with the COVID pandemic, so that didn't quite go to plan, but the results shown here are from years past that, where we were back in the class, everything was running back as normal. So what we had decided to introduce into our statistics course, so these are sort of introductory statistics courses. A lot of our students who will be taking these courses will continue to study statistics or at least mathematics with us in the future. Some people may not, but maybe over 50% we would think will at least go on to study maths or statistics in a future year. So we decided to introduce this flipped learning. I'm sure all of you know what flipped learning is, so I won't labour these points. But I think one thing that's important to note is we did go through all of these benefits with our students. We wanted to try and ensure that they understood why we were doing this and the fact that it was beneficial for their learning. We weren't just trying to fob off all of the work to them. We really wanted to bring them on board with what we were trying to do. And within our class, what we decided to do was essentially give students some pre-lecture reading and some quizzes to introduce our topics to those students, and they were done before the live session or the lecture. We then were able to use our lecture sessions to focus on active learning, and we were really trying to motivate that by interesting examples. So there were lots of activities for our students to do in the classroom. We asked them to work generally in groups or by themselves within each lecture. Because it was such a large class, it was difficult to really have that individual discussion with students. So we used Mentimeter to try and make that a little bit more engaging, but also to make sure we were getting some real-time feedback within the classroom, because with 300 students, it's really quite difficult to keep track of what's going on. You can see in the picture here, we were very, very lucky to be given one of our active learning spaces within the University of Glasgow. So this room is really set up perfectly for what we were trying to do. The students are sat within groups automatically. There are screens all around the room. You're all on one level, so we can walk and wander amongst the students as well, which is really great. So we were very, very lucky with that. So the question is, we introduced this flipped learning. Did it work? So as anyone will know if you've tried this yourself, it really relies on preparation from the students and trust that they're going to do what you're asking them to do. If they don't, the live session it's not really being presented in the way it was anticipated. Students aren't showing up prepared and therefore are maybe a little bit lost because you're running or you're driving straight into examples rather than going through any of the background. And the early indications that we felt from being in the lecture, from speaking to students, was that students weren't really completing that pre-lecture material, or the vast majority of students weren't. Being statisticians, we decided to look at the data and see if that sort of gut feeling was true. And I present here some data from 2022, so it's a couple of years ago now. I'll quickly explain what the plot shows, and then we can have a chat about what that meant, the dire situation we found ourselves in. So you can see each line corresponds to a week's worth of material. So the red line at the top is the pre-lecture material for week 1. So it was released in week 1. By the end of week 1, just over 25% of students had completed that pre-lecture material. And then we tracked this throughout the semester. So by the end of the course in week 11, just less than 50% had completed that pre-lecture material. So you can see from week 1, we started off quite bad, and then we got worse and worse and worse as the semester went on. Engagement in classrooms is not something that's unique, or low engagement is not something that's unique to Glasgow. I'm sure you're all battling with it in your own institutions. But even I was quite shocked by this. I mean, you're thinking at the start of the course, these are all students generally straight from school. You would think there would be a little bit of sort of excitement and people wanting to be engaged and active in their learning. But even right at the start, I mean, most people just weren't even bothering to do what we were asking them to do. So really, we were set up to fail, and it was quite demoralising after all of the work that we put in. So what did we do about it? Or before I talk about what we did, why do we think it went wrong? So we did try and reflect on this ourselves. We were getting comments from students in our feedback like, could you provide general notes before you go through the worked examples? To us, that was defeating the point of what we were trying to do, because then you're just going back to a traditional style lecture. But we did understand that there is some impetus on us to try and change what we were doing to make sure that it's not just a complete failure. We can't just assume students are going to do it, and even if they don't, just run blindly with what we had planned. So we tried to make a couple of tweaks. We thought maybe there's too much work for them to do. Can we make that material that they're asked to do before the lecture a little less burdensome? So we removed some of the pre-lecture material. Students were clearly finding it very difficult to motivate themselves. They're sort of given a fixed deadline to get this work done, which requires time management skills, versus being put in a lecture where there's a dedicated fixed time slot for their learning. So they're being asked to take time out of their own busy lives to prepare for this lecture, rather than just saying, turn up at this hour and we'll teach you everything you need to know. We also thought maybe there's not enough positive reinforcement for our students who are completing those activities. You're doing all this work, you're coming to lectures prepared, a lot of your friends aren't, but you're not really being congratulated for that. So we thought, is there some way that we can reward these people who are engaging with our pre-lecture materials? And that brings me to what we decided to do. So we decided to use something called, or I had kind of wanted to add a gamification element to our course. Thankfully, I didn't have to do this myself. There's something already existed once I had a quick Google, and it was called Level Up. So Level Up is a plugin that we can use through our virtual learning environment for University of Glasgow, that is Moodle. And essentially students will get points to participate in the course via Moodle or via the online virtual learning environment. The course lecturer, the course lecturing team, they decide how and when the points should be awarded. So that's completely within your control. You can decide what activities you want to reward points for and how many they should be given for those. Because we were specifically trying to tackle engagement with those pre-lecture materials, those quizzes and readings before the lecture, we incentivise students by saying, okay, if you do it before the lecture, we'll give you full points. However, if you've missed something and you want to catch up, we still want to reward that. So if you complete it after the lecture, we'll give you half points. So really you were getting that full incentive to do it before lecture if you could. We wanted or very strongly wanted to make sure that this was all endeavour based and not merit based. So you weren't getting points for how well you completed those quizzes, you were getting the points purely for completing them at all. We felt that students who engage in the course and get a good grade at the end of the course are rewarded for their own merit at that point. We didn't want this to be an extra thing that they're rewarded for getting 100% in their quizzes. And then just a little cherry on the top, we'd said to our students, we'll reward you with some prizes at the end of the course. We didn't tell them what those prizes were, but we did sort of dangle that cherry in front of them. And just on the right-hand side of the slide, you can see this is what it looks like on the side of a student's Moodle page. So they can see where they rank amongst their students, how many points they have and what level. of the course they're in. So we had set it up that each level corresponds to a week. So by the end of the course, if you've completed everything, you should be on level 11. And this is what we found. So from the year before, the graph I already presented is on the left-hand side, and then the year that we introduced Level Up, you can immediately see the massive increase in engagement that we were seeing in those pre-lecture materials. So for example, again, we'll look at week 1. At the start or the end of week 1, over 75%, almost, close to 80% probably had completed that material before our lecture. And then by the end of the term, we're sitting even higher than that. And of course, we do see a drop off as the weeks go by. I think we will always see that. Students generally over the course of a semester, especially their first semester at university, tend not to be as engaged at the end of a course as they might be at the start. So we saw that really good engagement specifically in the first 3 weeks, and then it did drop off a little bit. But what you can see is that by the end, in week 10, we're already better than we were even at the start in week 1 the previous year. So although ideally you would want that engagement to be sustained, I was still really, really pleased with this and quite pleasantly surprised at how well it seemed to work, just giving them that little bit of an incentive. I should also say the results shown here are from people who provided consent to participate in our ethically approved study. So it's not everybody, but I hope you take my word for it that when we looked at the data for everybody, generally what we saw was the same. So it's not as though we're seeing some sort of enhanced performance because we've got those people who provided us consent. It really was quite similar for the whole cohort of students. So just some reflections before I finish up. We sort of introduced this on a whim just to do something to try and increase engagement without having to sort of reinvent the wheel and go back to the drawing board. For me, I thought interaction was way, way better than I expected. I thought if we get some students to be or to engage in the lecture material because of this, then great. I wasn't expecting it to be as many as they did compared to what we'd seen previously. We did ask for some informal feedback from students. 61% of our students said that Level Up was makes them more likely to engage in the course. So it really was having that positive effect that we were hoping for. Our average activity completion increased by 45% from the year before to the year that we introduced this. And also we did see a slight increase in the performance in our course. It might not have anything to do with Level Up. We know as statisticians, correlation doesn't imply causation, but we did see an increase in performance the year we introduced Level Up. As I had said already, we did say to students we would award prizes for students. So what we had said was people who will award a prize for the top 3 students. So if you have the most points, second most or third most points, we'll give you a prize. What we hadn't anticipated was that I think around 30 to 40 students did not drop a point the entire semester. So we had to rethink what our prizes might be because we had to award so many more than we had anticipated. And thankfully our school was very kind in providing us some money to buy some stats books and some donuts to hand out in lectures, which was really good. And another thing we did just quickly was we had the individual component, which I've talked through. We also had a group component, so students were collected into their tutorial groups on Moodle, and points were sort of accumulated within those tutorial groups. So we had a little bit of a team prize competition going on as well, and our tutors and demonstrators got very into that and were sort of encouraging their tutorial groups to make sure they were engaging in the course so that they could win those prizes. So that was a nice bit of fun as well and added a little bit of incentive for people to get to know each other in their tutorials, which was great. Now, just to finish up before we take any questions, my experience from introducing flipped learning, I was quite excited about it and then really quite demoralised when it just did not go to plan. I would say it definitely needs very careful implementation. So it's quite a lot of work in terms of setting it all up. And you don't just want it to be wasted. So you really need to think carefully about what you're going to ask the students to do. Do you think that is going to be viable? Who are the students? Are they the type of students who are going to want to work before do some work before the lecture, or is it just not going to work for that sort of cohort that you have? Personally, I found that looking at that data on Moodle, so we were looking at the Moodle logs, it really helped us to give an overall picture of that student engagement. We had that gut feeling that students weren't completing it, but looking at the data, I mean, we could explicitly see the percentage of students who were engaging in those pre-lecture materials, which really just allowed us to actually understand what was going on before we were stepping into those lectures. One thing I definitely learned from the first year and going forward was it's important not to overburden your students. You have to remember that this is one course that they're taking over a series of courses, possibly even a series of different subjects that they'll be taking. You might think that your course is the most important, but remember they have a lot to balance. So it's really important to not overburden them with what you're doing. It can be quite disastrous, especially for younger students if they're showing up to the lecture completely unprepared and then not learning anything as a result of that. Certainly from our point of view, introducing this gamification element definitely helped boost motivation and engagement. I think it also really helped as course lecturers to just have a little bit of fun with the students. It's quite hard in a class of 300 to get to know them very well, but we were sort of bringing up the leaderboard every week and we were mentioning it in all of our lectures to try and get everybody on board. And it definitely added that little bit of fun. We had so many students come up to us at the end and say, I don't have a question, but I just want to check, did I get the right points for this thing that I did? And it was nice just to speak to students about that as well. As I sort of mentioned slightly already, you really need to think broader than just your course or just your module. Are other courses that these students are taking, are they following a flipped learning model? Because probably if they are, it's going to be too much to expect them to be preparing for every single lecture that they go to. So it's really important to try and think about what they're doing across that programme. What support do they need? Is it going to be too much to have flipped learning on all of their courses or a handful of their courses? We want to just try and find that right balance. And if you can, make sure you're tying your flipped learning in with what happens in your classroom. If you say you're not going to go over the material, don't go over the material. Or at least you have a very brief summary, but you want to make sure you're dedicating those sessions to active learning and really rewarding the students for their preparation. And what we also found, just as a little bit of guilt trip for students, was showing them those engagement stats. So showing them, we know 50% of you have already completed this material. That's great. We're really pleased that you've done that. It kind of, the people who haven't maybe think, oh, maybe I should do that for next lecture. So just showing them that information just sort of reinforces the, if you've done the pre-lecture material, we're really pleased that you've done it and thank you. Okay, thank you for listening. I hope there's a couple of minutes for questions, and just to point you to the direction of our paper that was published in Teaching Maths and its Applications. If you want any more information, then it's all available there. Thank you very much.
Right. Well, thank you very much for that. And I'm sure people can do the usual reactions. I'll do the clap with the thing there. So, do we have any questions? There aren't any in the Q&A. Yeah. I mean, I thought it was a fantastic talk. It's nice to see such a large effect. But I was wondering, when the students are doing, well, how do you measure the engagement with the materials? Is it possible for them to just go to the materials and click through and just go click, 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 click without learning anything? So they just turn up just as unengaged, as it were, during the lecture?
Yeah, so it depends on the type of material. So we had the quizzes and the readings. For the readings, it was just a tick button, so people could just tick it. For the quizzes, they had to actually go in and complete the quiz. Now, of course, they could go in, start the quiz, answer no questions, submit the quiz and get 0. And we did look to see sort of the average, what was the average grade that people were getting in those quizzes and compared them to previous years, and that didn't go down at all. So there might have been a handful of students who were just ticking through it and like completing the quiz but not actually answering questions, but generally we were finding that people were actually making some sort of valid attempt. So they were meaningfully engaging, not just trying to get their points, although I'm sure some of that does happen. We have to be realistic.
Yeah. So some people do want their donuts.
Exactly.
So
And they're good donuts.
that's a big prize. Yeah, I mean, I was quite surprised that it was such a a large increase. I mean, do you think it had anything to do with COVID? I mean, because it was very hard to tell during COVID what our students were like, here at Leeds when they came in, because they'd been assessed by their teachers and we weren't quite sure. I mean, could that be a part of the effect? I mean, did you think about that?
Possibly. As I said, the year that we introduced these changes was 2020, 2021. So we had anticipated that it would all go ahead in person. Then, of course, nothing went ahead in person and it was all online. But the data that I showed you for the two graphs today, both of those were normal in-person lectures, how we had anticipated the class would run. So, of course, there's been a COVID effect on, I think we've seen that for all of our students going through up all of the levels. But the two cohorts that we're comparing here, it's not as though one was a COVID cohort and one wasn't. They were both back to I guess, the new normal type of in-person lectures and in-person learning.
Yeah. Okay. But it seems to me that you actually felt a lot better about this. I mean, perhaps we shouldn't underestimate the effect of doing something and seeing an effect, from the students, and the effect it has on the lecturer to think, oh, actually, I feel a bit more inspired now.
Absolutely, because it was demoralizing when the results were so poor. So seeing such an uptick was amazing. And we've continued using this. I think this is our third year of using Level Up. And every year we get the same response. Students are really involved and engaged in it. I wasn't teaching last year, I was on maternity leave, but my colleague was running the ship for me. And he said he had to go out and buy hordes of donuts to give out as prizes. So they definitely seem to get something from it. And as you say, it's really nice from a lecturing point of view for something to go so well, because quite often we're just dealing with negative things a lot of the time. It feels like trying to get our students involved and trying to be as positive as we can, and it doesn't always work. So it was nice to do something that, to be honest, didn't take a huge amount from my side to set up. Once it's set up on Moodle, it kind of just runs itself. So it was nice to see such a positive impact on our students, definitely.
Yeah, I mean that's excellent. I'll look forward to looking at the paper. So we don't seem to have had any more questions. So I'd just like to thank you, and I'd like to thank all our speakers today. So we'll just have a quick round of applause, and you can use the old react buttons. So thanks to everybody.